Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting of the Sawyer County Multi-Dwelling Development Ad Hoc Committee to order, and we will start with roll call.
Dale Olson.
Here.
Ben Kurzweil. Robert Langham. Mike Bandow.
Here.
Steve Beining. Jim Strandlin. Laura Rusk. Sarah Delaney. Ron Kinsley.
Here.
James Bassett.
Here.
Tom Housel. Bon Sutton. Pete Baraboo. That's it. Thank you.
We do have a quorum?
Yes.
We do have a quorum, then let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we have some folks online.
No, just Maya from our office is
Okay.
listening in.
All right. Then I won't look to you for thumbs unless somebody else comes in later. Did you get a chance to look at the agenda? It should be everything that we have done and everything we have not acted on yet.
You guys all have back pages of your agenda?
Yeah, for some reason there was one in here so far.
Yeah, Kinsley doesn't. There's a couple other items on the back page if you don't have it. One was the density within the C1 district, additional public comments, ad hoc committee chair, potential future agenda items and meeting dates, and adjournment. And it's on the website here as well, so.
I got it.
Okay.
I guess I don't.
No, you don't.
Chair, we didn't do number 4.
We did not. Did we comply with the open meetings law?
Yes, this meeting agenda was submitted to the clerk, who then submitted it to the news media outlets, and it is posted on our public bulletin board.
Thank you, Mr. Buchholz, for reminding me. And since we looked at the agenda, is there a motion to accept the agenda as printed? Motions made by Bob, seconded by Bond. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Public comments, I have Ms. Linda Zilmer.
Linda Zilmer, Edgewater property owner, and I just want to repeat what I said unofficially at the public comment at the close of the last meeting, is that was the best meeting ever. It was really nice to know that several committee members, you guys have stuck through it. You contributed, you listened to each other, and then you kind of built off each other's ideas. And it was just really good to watch from back in the peanut gallery. One thing about the minutes from today's or from the last meeting is I think it missed a couple of important points that might be worth carrying forward into the record. Number one, I know the Sawyer County Lakes Forum had submitted a letter in the table looking at other counties and the previous lakes classifications for lot sizes. And I think they expected maybe to have been on that agenda, but Gina Cola read the letter and there was a table submitted, and it just says that she made public comment. Also, that there was committee discussion about really wanting to see the attorney's review of the work that you had done before you disband the committee work, so that you could either respond or acknowledge that that's what you wanted to go forward to the zoning committee. And finally, that while in the past meetings you had addressed density off of shoreland, the issue of shoreland density had been set aside, and I know the vice chair is absent, but he had asked that on this agenda that shoreland density be considered. With regard to the red line versions that are bringing things up to date, I would just like to ask that the zoning department use Muni code and not the old PDF file, and that when they take your actions, that when it gets put into draft form, it's actually in the language that will go into Muni code, so there's no disconnect between what you believe you voted on and what's going to get forwarded to legal review. With regard to, this is, I think, the first chance we've had to look at updating section 18.0, which is the table. And maybe if you get to that point later, you can discuss more about putting the additional dwelling unit or principal structure dimensions within the table and not footnoted. And so right now, for instance, an example, item 18.2, there's added language per each dwelling unit, which applies for residential, but it doesn't apply for commercial. And then, although it's not on the agenda, if you talk about shoreland density, should there also be an additional width requirement, as was discussed, but probably not acted on? So right now, I think where the committee has agreed is that for each additional unit, it's an additional 20,000 square feet. On shoreland, should it also be, besides a 100-foot width, an additional 100-foot width to make it 200 feet for two? And finally, one of the things that made it into this draft that I don't believe the committee approved was listing prohibited uses. And for sure, I believe the committee, after much discussion, realizes that 1 and 2 family dwellings are permitted and that they will not be prohibited in shoreland. So those are just the comments on the drafts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmer. Any other public comment? Hearing none, we will move on and have you take a look at the April 10th minutes for your approval. Motion by Mr. Bassett, seconded by Mr. Langham. Discussion. And I know I've got the big one down here. We have to rediscuss the size, the area. Did we mean width of the lot, another 100 feet plus area? I think that would be an important discussion to have. I don't know if we could go back and without listening to every tape again. I think that was what we meant. So we got a lot and they want to have 2 habitable dwellings on it. It isn't just adding the 20,000 square feet, because that would mean you could add 20,000 square feet behind it off lake. They used to call it keyholing. Remember the keyholing thing where you could put have one lake lot and have a chunk of land behind it and put 4 or 5 houses on it? And we did away with that probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. I think what we meant was another 20,000 square feet with 100 feet of shoreline. So if it's a 100-foot lake lot, you can't get your 20,000 square feet out of the chunk you own across the road behind that property. Go ahead, Mr. Bassett.
That was my intent, obviously, when I made that motion.
Kind of thought so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bon.
I was just gonna agree with James.
Yeah.
Believe it. you
That
need
was kind of the
100
intent
feet.
of all
It just
the-
makes sense.
Okay.
I agree with that. The other points, though, would it be worth including the elements in the minutes on the Sawyer County Lakes Forum, the attorney review being requested, that sort of thing?
The Lakes Forum, if we could just tighten up the wording in the minutes and, say, Ms. Akala provided information. I don't know would you like to have that worded?
I guess just that the Sawyer County Lakes Forum presented a letter and, expressed their views on lake classifications. Just the fact that they took the time to present, I think it should show up in the minutes.
Okay, so that's 2 things. Lakes Forum Kathy, you good with that?
Yeah.
And the other one would be the 100 lineal feet shoreline plus 20.
So I guess I have a question on that, because I'm looking back in my notes here. Meeting 3, we had a motion made and seconded that multi-dwelling development and or multifamily dwelling was not to be allowed in the shoreline district. And we weren't going to touch the other portion of the shoreline, which already states that you're only allowed one dwelling unit per lot. So that's why I specifically hadn't gone into the shoreline zoning ordinance to manipulate density, because I thought the position of this ad hoc was that we weren't going to allow it in the shoreland.
That is correct. Now, that does broach the fact that 3.42, looking at my red line version here. Three point four. Just had it in my hand. 3.42. When you find that, the chart, and then there's yellow on the bottom of that page, the last page of that packet.
And the 3.4 is the prohibited uses. So I went into the shoreline ordinance and said that multifamily dwelling and two-family dwelling are prohibited within the shoreline.
Yeah,
So that's why, again, I didn't make any density changes in shoreline because I didn't think it would matter, because weren't going to be allowed to do that at all.
and that's true. That was the intent of the committee, but we still have to broach that duplex thing where the state says you can have a duplex and we can't supersede that. I don't know how we would say are we back to semantics again with duplex and multifamily and all that kind of stuff? I think that's one that the attorney's going to catch and say, well, by state law, you can have a duplex anywhere you can have a single family. And is that going to cause us grief down the line? But it was the intent of the committee. You are correct.
So are you wanting me to task legal with seeing if we can restrict duplexes within the shoreland? If we can't prohibit duplexes within the shoreland, then go into shoreland and say each dwelling unit needs double the width and area? Because now a duplex has to have 200 feet and 40,000.
Yeah, that was kind of the intent of the committee right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So I think.
And if we
should-
can restrict in the shoreland, do we want to continue to restrict duplexes in the shoreland? Because that is what I have for a motion on meeting 3.
Why don't you say that again, Jay, so we can get more heads wrapped around this?
For meeting 3, there was a motion made and seconded to remove all multi-family dwelling and two-family dwelling units from the shoreline district. Shoreline district then only states you're only allowed one dwelling unit per lot. So if we can restrict duplexes in the shoreland, do we want to continue to do that with legal's opinion? Or if legal says, no, you can't restrict duplexes in the shoreland, to then say each dwelling unit, again, a two-family dwelling unit, a duplex is 2 dwelling units in one dwelling. Do we want to have a larger density requirement for those? Again, going back to 200 feet of width of frontage and 40,000 square feet of land area. I guess to not think about hypotheticals, task me to go ask legal if we can do that, because again, you did make a motion second to prohibit two-family dwellings within the shoreland.
We did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I think Jim made that motion and we discussed it. So basically what Jay is telling us is if we can restrict it, let's restrict it. If that was our intent. And if we can't, then let's place the other density stipulations. So we're trying to cover ourselves on either side of it. What can we get away with and what can't we?
Sure. Good, Bob.
I think the intent, to her point was that, it be restricted. I don't know if we will be able to do that because of legal. And we may end up going with the 200 feet and the 40,000 square feet total for two dwellings. Either way, if you do that, you're still getting the same amount of area on the lake that you would for a single family dwelling, which is usually the intent, because what we're trying to do is limit the amount of foot traffic per square foot. And by doing that, I think we are doing what we really want to intend to do. Because I think if we restrict it, we're not going with the status quo of the state.
Yeah, I think I can capture that either way after I reach out to legal on that. I think that'll be pretty easy to do in the shoreland.
Okay, then we won't have to put that in as a change. So what I'm looking at then is we have a motion to approve the minutes. And Mr. Bassett, would you be willing to accept a friendly amendment that we had input from the Lakes Association and they provided us with information to go into the minutes?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Mr. Langham? Okay, so then with that caveat, is everyone in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye? All opposed? No opposed. We're moving along. Number 8, updated red line version. Bet you can figure out which one that is. So this is the red line version that of the changes that we've made. So you can see the strike through is what goes away. The black was where it was. And this didn't change much since our last meeting.
No, and there's another one in there. There's a red line between version 3 and version 4, and that might be the easier one to look at because there have been, obviously quite a few changes from current to version 4. But the one that's titled version 3 to version 4 will have just the new recent changes. So last time, one of the aspects was, okay, how do we solidify that if you're going to do a duplex, or you're going to do one of these, multifamily dwellings, how do we capture that you need that additional land area? I guess this would be a question is, with this offshore land, is that where you still wanted additional width requirements, or was it just the square footage requirements? Because what I did is gone to each zone district as part of the conditional use permit or authorized permitted uses, and basically stated that, each dwelling unit requires additional lot area pursuant to section 18. Then in section 18, the required lot area per each dwelling unit would read that you need either 10,000 square feet on public sewer and then the 20,000 square feet on non-public sewer, less the R1 zone district. You guys made a motion that you wanted an additional 10,000 square feet of land area as opposed to the current 5,000 square feet.
Yes.
So again, this is not lakeshore, but
Correct.
do you care about width?
So this would be non-lake shore stuff. You've got a 2-acre lot, zone R1 off of Schaefer Road. Does it matter how you get the additional 10,000 square feet? Can it be, 100 by 10 or? My only thought is that 10,000 square feet should be able to contain the new dwelling. In other words, if you made it 1 foot by 10,000 foot, you can't put a house in there. It would be nice if it was 100 by 100 instead of some weird, something that, I mean, you could put your house in 100 by 100. Maybe it doesn't have to be. They're just saying there has to be another 10,000 square feet. And the only reason I'm thinking something like that is, people come up with some pretty wacky scenarios, the way they're able to game the system. And I don't want to see, oh, I've got this chunk of land and I'm going to go 5 feet by 200 and by 2,000. But all of a sudden now that gives me carte blanche to put in, across my 40, I can put all these strips in there and do a whole bunch or something on that order. I don't know if it makes a difference. It probably doesn't, but.
Yeah, because you'll still need to meet setbacks on the new dwelling that you're proposing.
Yeah.
So even if you had, a decent rectangle of area, and then you're just trying to gain additional square footage by making a small, slender lot, that decent chunk that you still had is gonna have to meet the setbacks to fit those 2 dwelling units on initially. And if they wanna cram each other on top of them, you're shooting yourself in the foot for your market value in the long run, but.
Yeah, Mr. Bassett?
This is a little bit off topic, but I have never actually understood how you figure into how much square footage you need to build a house. Particularly when you're talking on Lake Shore, you're pretty much obviously talking about an area where they have to have their own septic system on said land. Then and to make it even more confusing, different soils, allow water to trickle through at different rates. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could change the formula. Is there any way to have I'm not sure the right way of even asking this, a cover-all square footage needed for a septic system that I see Jay shaking his head no.
You're on topic with that. Yes, I mean, it has a variety of factors. What is the soil type and the infiltration rate? How many bedrooms is the system being proposed at? Those all have a factor as to what area you may need for a sewer system.
And then following that is the other question. Do we have anything in our ordinance, and I don't remember ever hearing, I'm sorry, Joe. Do we have anything in our ordinance that says, okay, you can put another house in there because you got enough land, whatever, but about using the same septic system? Do we have we have something in the ordinance to cover that?
If they're gonna commingle their septics,
Yeah.
yeah, it has to be sized appropriately from,
PS, yeah, so there's still, so if you had an existing sewer system, let's say it was a 2-bedroom sewer system, you had a 2-bedroom house, and then you wanted to add this other dwelling unit, which is also a 2-bedroom system, or a 2-bedroom house that you're proposing, we wouldn't allow you to hook into that existing sewer system because it's gonna be grossly undersized.
Thanks, guys.
well. Go ahead, Jim.
What about, I know back in Minnesota, some of the places they had to leave you a secondary spot for a sewer. Do we have that in anything written?
We did, and then we don't. Right.
But there's a why. In Sawyer County, a holding tank is still a system of choice. They can choose to put in a holding tank. And, obviously doesn't require the seepage bed, the infiltration bed like a normal system would. So. All right, and And I'm fairly certain, otherwise I've been lying to everybody I've talked to lately, that these are state definitions. I mean, we didn't come up with our own wacky definitions. They are state definitions, so I don't think anybody can really argue with that. Jay, is there anything else you wanted to point out in the versions that we're looking at?
I guess this is where I got a little confused, towards the end of last meeting, because we did have some motions that said resorts as conditional use permits in the RR2 zone district. And then we said that we weren't going to allow resorts in the RR1 or R1 zone district. But then I brought up the scenario with the rental of existing dwelling units on one lot. And those also contained as a condominium form of ownership. And then things we had a lot of different talking points at that point. And I don't know if we ever came to a finalization as to what we do with that scenario. That ultimately leads into the next agenda topic. So the only time I've changed something so far is within the RR2 as a use authorized by conditional use to add resort into that. Again, we may need to go back and amend, add, delete other places. And then the one other thing that we really never, I guess, made a motion and a second on was density in the commercial zone district. So what I've done here, and would still need your blessing. So not only did I add that the lot area is required per dwelling unit in 18.2, that you need that additional lot area per each dwelling unit, that would apply to all zone districts. So it would apply to your R1, your RR1, your RR2. You're never really going to see it in Ag 1 or Ag 2 or Forestry 1 because those already have 5-acre minimums to begin with. But the other interesting one is that commercial 1 zone district where, again, if you're wanting to do a hotel or a motel, each of those are considered dwelling units. And that in order to have a 10-unit motel, you need to have the acreage for each dwelling unit. So that's where I made that change in the commercial zone district. And we can certainly discuss that as part of the agenda item, but I thought that would be the easiest. If this committee was to say, yes, each dwelling unit needs double the minimum dimensional requirements for the lot, why don't you have that in every zone district, in residential 1, in residential recreational 2, and in commercial? Keep it consistent across the board.
So those are both on our agenda as numbers 9 and 11, right?
Yep, but that would also then kind of solidify that as 17.6 parent A for the motels, because motels is the only zone district that would allow for, commercial would be the only zone district that allows for motels. And then again, with adding that language in 18.2, that per each dwelling unit, that is again across all zone districts, not just the residential ones that we've been discussing, includes commercial.
Go ahead, Bud.
So here's the problem with that. With commercial being the way it is, and you're talking motels, you're not going to be able to get the density that you have in R1, R2, and RR1. And the reason being is because motels typically have several units right next to each other, correct? Okay, the other thing is that now that we have what are they called? Resorts in the C1, they're falling under that same thing. And there are several that we have that are similar to motels.
So right now we don't have resorts in C1.
That's what the proposal was.
RR2 is the only one they're in
RR2.
right now. They're
Oh,
not.
okay.
They're not in C1. And I did misspeak about motels.
Then I was-
Motels is 6.1. Every unit of a motel requires an additional 5,000 square feet. That's pursuant to section 6.10.
Okay.
Motels is commercial is the only zone district that allows motels.
Okay, all right. I stand corrected.
So options then would be reducing in the commercial zone district for a motel, hotel, reducing the additional lot size for those units. I mean, that's one option.
And that's already in there. So I guess it wouldn't be the motel aspect, but other permitted uses or uses authorized by conditional use in commercial would be like that room and boarding house, bed and breakfast, if you wanted additional units in a commercial zone district, or you may find someone that, I don't know, wants to do like a quadplex or something in commercial as a long-term rental apartment complex, not a motel, but an apartment complex.
I'm just trying to think, how many units does a motel around here have? Like
8, 10, 12.
8 or 10, huh?
is that all?
Until you get to like the, Comfort Inn and Suites or Flat Creek, you start talking about the ones that are out on 27, like the one with the red roof. I forget the name of that one.
Northern or?
Yeah, they only got like 12 units in there.
What does Jim Miller's old one north on 63, how big is that
In
one?
the city, I don't know. That's more than 12 for sure. It's 30 plus in that one.
So let's just say it's, a normal one would be even at 20 units. So 5,000 square feet at 20 units is 100,000. So that would mean you'd have to have a couple of acres. 43,560 in an acre and need 100,000, so 2.5 acres. Well, they're gonna need that much for parking anyhow, right? So it really, I think we're probably pretty close there. They're gonna need at least an acre plus to park. So I think that probably is okay. If I did my math correctly, which there's no guarantees. Does that sound reasonable? That if you have 20 units, you'd have to have 2.5 acres of land? I think it sounds pretty reasonable.
One of the things is realize is it going to be a multi-level? We want up 6 levels.
Yes. Yep. So unless anybody feels differently, can sure broach that.
And I think the only time this would come up, again, motels has its own square footage requirement for units. So you need the initial 20,000 square feet, and then you need 5,000 per every unit for hotels. The only other time this would come up is if someone was proposing a room and boarding house, which is another permitted use within the commercial zone district. And we have a new definition of rooming and boarding house. It's a 1 or 2 family dwelling that offers overnight sleeping accommodations to individuals that are not tourists or transient. But you could have potentially a 2-family boarding house in a commercial zone district. But should that commercial zone district to have those 2 units be 40,000 square feet? And my current version 4 would say yes, that would be the case. Because you needed an R1 and RR1 to do a duplex already. Why not have that for the same in commercial?
Stands to reason to me. Good. All right, so that would be the red line draft version that we looked at. And we just have to take care of numbers 9, 10, and 11. Are the big ones? We are moving along. So 9 is resort use, rental of more than one dwelling, and condo rentals that we've tabled and tabled. And I still think there's an answer here because, again, condominium is a form of ownership. It's not a thing. So one guy wants to rent, one guy doesn't want to rent. We bantied that about. And, that I think in their condo association bylaws, they're going to have to take the onus upon themselves to work on that. But what are we thinking about for this topic? Resort rental of more than one dwelling and condo rentals. Can we just say that, if it walks like a duck and acts like a duck, it's a duck and treat it like a resort? Or Or do you just say, no, you guys don't have the same rights as any other person in this room that owns a home and wants to put it on VRBO and rent it out, the condo owners have that same right to do that. And I personally think they do. You can, go ahead, Bon.
I think it would behoove us to just go with that. And the reason being is because one, if you can do it for condo, you should be able to do it for a resort. And if you can do it for a private entity or a private person, you should be able to do it as well. I think we don't really want to restrict anybody from being able to, how do I put it? Utilize their assets to produce income. However, we don't want them to abuse that either. I think that's also what we are looking at. But I think that in this point, it would behoove us to do that.
Different thoughts? I'm always open.
So are you not saying that rental of multiple condominium units would classify as a resort?
Not saying that. Resorts, and like you said, act like a duck, quack like a duck. Generally, resorts are a dwelling, a home or a cabin. Okay, and there's multiple of them. When we're talking about condo, generally that's one structure with several different partitions and different people, entities in each one. Would I restrict them from being able to rent those out? No, because that's the idea of what they're for.
So then it still boils down to the use. So if you don't think that's a resort, then I need to, get that information from this ad hoc so I can kind of put that into draft language. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I think you're going to end up seeing a lot of scenarios where we have these existing dwelling units on one lot that are not as a condo right now. They're going to go to condo to circumvent rules of being classified as a resort, which may require additional approvals, conditional use permits, or even be potentially prohibited in a specific zone district.
So
And that's the element that I'm
the
struggling with.
benefits
Yeah.
of separating them outweighs the benefit of leaving them together, correct? Understood.
And always has. That's why so many of them have already gone condo
Yes,
throughout this county.
makes sense.
I know there are folks around that think anything more than one condo being rented because they're on one piece of property. But when you look at a condo plat and they wrap around every house and they are individually different owners, I think that's where the difference is. That I own my little tiny postage stamp size spot with the house in it. So does it matter that the rest of the land is common? I'm not saying it's a good idea because the other condo owners might not be very happy to be, having people renting and moving about and using stuff. At the same time, I don't know any other way around it. So is it more than one condo for the association, or is it each individual owner owns their home on communal land? And that's kind of the way I'm leaning.
Do we know how current association language reads on that for condos? I mean, how do most of the associations address it now? Do they allow each individual to rent?
From what I've seen, it's 50-50. It's different. Some condos specifically put it in their bylaws or their declaration that prohibit rentals. The ones that we are seeing where they have multiple rentals already occurring under TRH, they don't have it in there. And yeah, you own a unit, Bond owns a unit, Kathy owns a unit, and I own a unit, and you three are renting, and I'm pissed off because you guys are renting because I got, different people in there every
Yeah.
week. So, and it does, again, it does pit condo owners against themselves, but that's again where we can write language that would establish that you can only rent one dwelling unit per owner, but you're still gonna have someone that, if now I own all four of these units, I'm gonna just put them in different LLCs. And now it's a different form of ownership and I'm gonna rent each four. I mean, I brought up, and this is where I, kind of walking on eggshells, because there was a circuit court order for the property next to Kurzweil, the old Arrow Resort, where the judge specifically stated as part of a default judgment that rental of both of those units would be constituted as a resort. I guarantee that individual will condo those units. He'll have them in different ownerships and he'll be able to rent them both. If we don't have other types of prohibitions that would require a conditional use permit, or if you restrict a resort use per a zone district.
Do we have the ability to regulate what sort of language is in association? Then what can you do if we have no jurisdiction over that?
We can treat it as a resort.
What about a conditional use like you had suggested?
That would be the meet in the middle type of scenario there, where if you own a condo, and again, we'll take our scenario, us four own a condo, and you three want to rent, you guys, as an association, need to come in and apply for a conditional use permit to operate as a resort, because you're renting more than one unit on a condo plat. Now, the sticky part is, okay, is it allowed in any zone district, or are you going to restrict the zone district? But if you classify that as a resort, and you say you need a conditional use permit to do so, at least the town gets a kick at it to put conditions on. I, as the person that doesn't like this, gets to, voice my concerns and potentially get specific conditions such as fencing, duration of rental. Yeah, because now whereas a conditional use permit, we can restrict the number of days that you're able to rent. That's the meet in the middle approach to what I at least see on that scenario.
Does that sound amenable to everyone? That treat it as a resort and
So basically, Jay, you're gonna make them change the zoning district if they do that, am I correct?
Well, it depends on what zone district you would allow resorts. If you allow a resort in an R1 or an RR1 or an RR2, you could all put them as conditional use permits in those zone districts. Where if you're renting more than one unit on that lot or plat, be it a condo plat, you'd be viewed as a resort and you need to obtain a conditional use permit before doing that type of use, rental more than one.
I think that makes a lot of sense because if, say you bought one condo, she sells hers and you bought hers and you bought hers, now you got 3 or 4 of them.
Mhm.
So now you should be going back into a classic of a resort. Does that make sense?
But then it doesn't really matter about ownership. And you're not going to see more people wanting to go into condo. Because again, I'll bring up the Kurzweil situation. They have 2 dwelling units on one lot. They have 2 pre-existing units that were built back in the 60s. This was an old resort. They chopped the lots up. When this one lot got chopped, 2 units stuck on one lot. That's not uncommon in this county.
No.
Right. Now he wants to rent both of those. It was a resort back in the 70s, stopped being a resort. Now he wants to reoperate it as a resort. He doesn't have the lot area to, split the lot and have 2 units on each separate lot. And as of right now, the current language of that circuit court ruling, he's not able to get a resort conditional use permit approval process. So.
If it was operated as a resort, sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
If it was operated as a resort back in the day and they want to operate it as a resort now,
Discontinued non-conforming use.
Right.
correct. I understand. And they haven't operated it for a year. I still think that they should be able to do that. If the dwellings are already there and they're not changing anything. Because they're not making them bigger. They're not making them, taller, larger, whatever.
They would still have to go for a conditional use permit.
Correct. And then you could actually put on the restrictions if you wanted to do that. That would make sense.
So couldn't they make a breezeway between the two and consider it a condo then? Another option, make a breezeway between the two, join them together, and turn it into a,
I've seen many people do that. I mean, let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
a CUP is required.
Yeah.
And that way the town gets kick at it for the, then there's at least 3 layers. Plan commission, town, zoning committee. Hopefully between those 3 layers, they can hammer out something that's equitable. I guess I would defer my thoughts and I would be good with that. You like it, Laura?
Not a lot, but I'm understanding what the dilemma is.
Well, we start getting into the, condo ownership and LLCs in Mr. Bassett's township. There's a huge landowner that divided up thousands of acres of land into 40-acre parcels. And it says LLC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And all it did was enable them to use the a clause in the forest crop law or managed forest law program that says you can exempt 40 acres from public hunting. So since they're each their own individual entity, being a different LLC number, you can exempt that and you don't have to allow hunting. And it's thousands of acres, wouldn't you say?
It pays tens of dollars in tax.
And pays tens of dollars in taxes, which has been a problem for 15 years. And it's been brought up and broached and taken to the state and nothing has changed. So sometimes you end up with those weird scenarios like that. But I think this would be probably the most fair, and it gives the towns and the county a kick at the cat to say, hey, if there's no problems, then you can keep doing it. I know Burnett County, you get 1 citation, you're done renting. That's for their tourist rooming houses. So somebody goes and shoots off fireworks. Somebody next door neighbor calls the cops because they were doing it at midnight. And, oh, you got a citation for fireworks for one of your people. No more renting your property out.
So if we were to go back to, how does this work then? If we're to go back to, you can resort or revert back to being a resort, is that only in certain zone districts? Or say it was 20 years ago that you ran the resort.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, there's new neighbors, there's a whole different scenario.
Yep.
Some properties have been lotted off and made this and that. So it's much more of just a residential area neighborhood. So are we going to say that's okay in all the zone districts that resorts are allowed in? Or will the resorts only be allowed in a certain zone district?
Well, resorts are only going to be allowed in RR2.
Yeah.
So they would potentially have to rezone unless, is there any unless? If you wanted to call it a resort, or are we
They'd have
going
to
to call it
rezone.
a condo association? Well, there's plenty of condo associations in RR1. Yes. You want to call it come up with a new term for it?
Potentially.
A something condo,
But again, if you're just saying it's for condos because of the RR1 scenario, and even if someone currently isn't a condo and has multiple units, they're just going to convert to condo to still apply for conditional use permit for a condo rental. So are you really solving anything by changing the term of it outside of the more than rental of 1 unit is a resort, period? You see where I'm going with that?
yeah, I do. I don't have the answer, but I see where you're going. Yeah, because we could call it not really a condo area rentals. I don't know what you would call it, but I don't want to say, okay, you're a condominium association, there's 6 properties in there, 4 of you want to rent your places for weeks. Are we telling them you have to become a resort? Because I think with resort comes a bunch of other problems. We would call it something.
When you're getting a conditional use permit to operate a use that is a for-profit business holding a seller's permit and licensed by the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection, which provides the rental to the public of dwelling units contained in one or more permanent buildings.
You just read the definition of resort.
Right. Well, I don't see what else comes into place with that. I mean, you said other things kick in.
Well, what I'm talking about is if your insurance company finds out that you own a resort instead of owning a single piece of property, there's issues with that.
Maybe that's a blessing in disguise. then.
Maybe it is. Yeah, maybe it is. Bond, you got the answer?
I think we're talking about duration. Normally, when you're talking about a resort, there's a finite time that people rent. Condos generally are longer term of rental. So you might utilize that rather than, the definition between the two. Because if you say, generally somebody who's doing a resort, they usually are here for a week to 2 weeks. You could say 30 days at tops. But a person who rents a condo, generally that's a long-term rental, I would think.
I rent them all the time by the week down south. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm just trying to think through how you would execute this. Does that mean that for every condo association in which individual owners are renting, would it be required for each condo association to apply for a conditional use permit to enable those rentals to continue?
If there's more than one, yes.
If there's more than one. Now, let's take this 4-unit example that I had before. I think you could easily classify it that as the entire condo plat, we are operating it as a resort because we're renting more than one. Not each individual unit needs to get a new CUP. We've been designated as a resort use of the entire condo.
Right, but the condo association would have to come and apply for that conditional use permit.
Correct. And that's where their other condo bylaws and declarations may say that it requires 51% approval in order for the association to sign off on something. 3/4 vote or 75%. I've even seen some that requires unanimous decisions.
Right.
Where if I'm that one person that doesn't want the rental, and I say, no, I'm not signing off on that condo association, you do not have my approval to submit for a conditional use permit to operate a resort, that then tasks zoning with saying, you're now running an illegal resort, you'll need to cease and desist, HHS, please revoke their tourist rooming house license for rental.
So if that condo association decides, all the guys decide, okay, we want to rent, all of us want to be able to rent. So now we will have to be classified as a resort. How many condos are not in RR2? So then they would have to rezone if resorts are only allowed in RR2, correct?
Yeah, I was semi-tasked with that. I did not have time to dive down that rabbit hole as to find out how many condos that we currently have in the RR1 zone district, but I would assume that it's probably equal to the same amount that is in RR2. There are a lot of condominiums right now with multiple units in the
So
RR1
in
zone
order to
district.
operate as a resort, then they would have to rezone themselves to RR2 and then apply for conditional use permit.
If that is what this ad hoc committee decides is the appropriate zone district to allow for that use, yes. Otherwise, you could also state that resorts are allowed in RR1, which you still would need a conditional use permit for.
All right, so, before when we talked about resorts, we talked about new resorts, somebody wanting to start one. And where was it a good place to have them. We said RR2, let's not have them in RR1. And now we're looking at existing resorts, and if Jay's correct in saying that half of them are in RR1 right now, do we want to say resorts, and I don't think I do, new resorts be allowed in RR1? I don't think I like that, but. And that's kind of where I was going with that, when I asked Jada, well, what are they doing? And he read the definition of resort, and that's what they're doing. It's our last meeting, can't table it, so. Well, I guess, yeah. They're allowed in RR2. If you want to rent, we're going to consider you a resort. You have to get a rezone if you're in RR1 and a conditional use. And running up the flagpole. I think that's probably that is a meet in the middle. At least they have the option to get it. And it isn't that onerous.
I think that's a good approach myself.
You guys like it?
So only in RR2, not in RR1 for a resort. So if someone wants to rent more than one dwelling unit, they will need a rezone and a conditional use permit to operate said resort.
Yep.
Okay.
That would make sure they're committed.
And probably worth the money. Because one person can do it already. So if it's a 4-person condo association, and only one's doing it, they don't need to do it. But when 2 of them say, yeah, we both want to do it, well, you just have the amount that you're going to have to pay for the rezone, for the conditional use, so they can all do it. So then the money isn't that bad when you can chop that in half. Okay, so we should take action on that. Was it clear? You want me to restate what we just did? RR2 is where resorts would be. That would include condo associations that are renting. And if more than one is renting, they would have to get a rezone if they're not in RR2. If they're in RR2, they would not have to, and a conditional use permit. Clear? That sound right, Sarah?
It's very clear. I'm just thinking of the administrative burden to go back and chase those who are operating in that way, but the county doesn't keep track of that, do they? Is Matt McKay in his,
We do. Now, we definitely have some pre-existing non-conforming resort uses out there right now. And I would not be going back on them in that they've continuously operated as a resort. It would be these condo units that have just started renting within like the last decade, where that is, going to be it's going to be difficult to do. I'm just looking at, some of these, specific zone districts. I'm looking, and I have it up on the screen. Here's Round Lake, for example. I don't see any RR2 zone district along the lake shore on Round Lake. Everything around Round Lake is zoned RR1. And I know there's multiple condominium units out there, and I know there's multiple condominiums out there that most likely are renting multiple units on one lot. You talk about the aspects of rezoning. Are towns going to view those requests coming in as potential spot zoning and not allow for the rezones? I have a feeling probably get sued, but I'm fine with that.
no, the question was more around, would we retroactively go back and chase all of those that are operating in that manner? And what I heard you say is, no, this would only be for new condo associations getting established.
Would be new, it basically would be new rentals. So prior to HHS being the agent of the state that did the short-term rental to a swimming house aspects, it was held by DACAP. Those DACAP records, I believe, go back to 2002. If memory serves me correctly, I'd have to check back with HHS. If HHS has records that they had continuously rented more than one dwelling unit prior to 2002, I probably wouldn't go back because they would basically have established that they're an existing resort use. It would be those that just popped up within the last 5-10 years that we have this condo situation, and now Bond's renting and Laura's renting, and they never rented up until the last 5 years because there's been this boom of those short-term rentals. We would end up viewing that as a resort use, and they would need to potentially get a rezone to a residential recreational too, as well as a conditional use permit to operate it as a resort. There's going to be hundreds, well, maybe up close to 100 of those scenarios.
Right, that's where I'm thinking the right to rent law, changed the whole picture. And as long as we take this decision, appreciating the amount of activity that's going to have to incur, that was my only point.
Well, the rezone will start with the town's planning commission, and whether or not that type of thing is provided for in the planning commission. And then it moves on from there. It seems like a fair way to go about it.
Hey, Bond?
I think what the consensus was is that the towns want to have a say in something like this. If it's good, then obviously they'll approve it. If not, they may put stipulations on it. I think the biggest thing is that they would like to have a say on it, and I think that's probably the right route to go.
And we could do something that's not retroactive, right? And just do it going forward or not?
I would ask legal about that. I am not sure. I've seen other dates set as an effective date.
Yep.
I've seen others that regardless of effective date, you need to be coming in compliance by a specific date, so.
I'm assuming that's going to stem a lot of lawsuits. And so retroactive, you're going to get in a lot of trouble going backwards, I think.
All right, but are we good with nobody's made a motion yet, but are we good with what we've discussed? Does somebody want to make that motion? Kathy, you got it enough to, or do you want me to, I can make the motion so I can word it? So I would move that resort use as in rental of more than one dwelling and condo rentals be allowed in RR2. And a conditional use permit to meet the definition of resort for more than one dwelling.
No, second.
Second by Bond. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Look, Kathy, get that written down. Thank you.
All right. Number 10, does anybody want a break? Break or sally forth? We'll move forward. Number 10, illegal habitable living area above garages and non-conforming structures. Structure versus use tabled from last meeting. So you've got a garage that you built. It's been stamped that you can't have habitable dwelling area, habitable living area above that garage. And you want to put a family above all your gas cans, hot lawnmower, and garage heater that has been maintained in 20 years. Go ahead, Bond.
They're doing it right now. They're just not getting a permit for it. At least have them pay for a permit or something of it. Because that way we would have record of it and know where we are and how it's actually being used. Do I agree with it? No, but that's the way Minneapolis is going and everywhere else is gonna add that way. So I'm torn on it. Honestly, I don't think you should have somebody above your garage, but a lot of people already have it. So let's have them pay for it. That way we know somebody's up there.
If you have a garage and it's built to proper standards with, say, restrooms, all this is a different story. But again, I believe our building codes inspectors don't do anything because it's considered like a remodel and they don't ask for a permit. So some way of making them get some kind of a permit, enforcing it is where to make it so they have to meet code standards. So I agree with that. Somehow they have to be forced to follow codes and get a building permit, remodeling permit.
So then there would have to be a UDC inspection as part of it? I mean, if you're going to build a habitable dwelling above your garage, it certainly has to be inspected just as any new dwelling would be, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's why you got to get a permit. So the permit goes to the building inspector in that territory and he has to follow up. Am I correct? Dale?
Yeah, they do have to do that. And also in order to rent it, they would have to contact the health department and have an inspection. Or they actually do rentals by the cubic foot. It's not square foot of floor area, it's cubic feet. Not really sure why they do that. That's the way the state laws are written. It's so many people per 1,000 cubic feet. And I have no idea why they did that. But regardless, so these are right now supposed to be uninhabitable. Are they doing it? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. I don't know if I would want to say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and let them start renting them. Then we get the 2 dwellings per lot that we're all here to say we don't want anyhow.
Keep
I
in
agree
mind
with
that a lot of, excuse me, keep in mind a lot of them do it just for their kids or some of this kind of scenario too. So we have to define that kind of it's a non-rental aspect.
I would agree with that because the ones in Minneapolis are doing it as mother-in-law addition.
Put your mother-in-law above the garage?
Why
Yes.
not? If it burns down, you're okay.
Oh, there's always that hope that she falls down and leaves the
Yeah,
inheritance.
exactly.
Bad.
Yeah, that's one thing to have it as overflow for the grandkids or the mother-in-law or whatever. Entirely another one to put it on VRBO and be renting them out.
Correct.
Well, most of them. Kathy, when you approve those permits, what's your red ink say?
No habitable
No habitable
space.
space.
Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, so the main reason this was put on there, well, kind of twofold. One, back in 2022, we created what was known as the temporary guest quarters because we saw that it was a runaway of these basically bonus rooms above garages. And it was such a difficult enforcement use aspect because again, I'd go out to some of these garages thinking for sure there's a 2nd-story living quarters up there, and lo and behold, no, it was just general overflow storage. They had a Christmas tree, some, patio furniture that they stored up in the winter, and it was truly designated as absolute storage. I've gone to others where, oh, that looks like just a little storage area above a garage, and no, and they had a full, kitchenette, a bedroom, a bathroom, and everything else. Those are very difficult to monitor use because I don't have permissions to go inside of structures without getting a warrant from the judge. So that's where we created the temporary guest course. So basically, if we can't enforce this type of use, let's create an allowance to do it and get it permitted and charge fees for it. So we did designate out what's known as temporary guest quarters, which allows for less than 500 square feet of sleeping space. It is not classified as a separate dwelling in that it's less than 500 square feet. UDC requires that it be more than 500 square feet to be associated as a dwelling. We also require that as part of that permit, they sign an affidavit that they are not able to rent that space. So the concerns of having two rentals on one lot really doesn't come into play because HHS already knows that they cannot be extending the rental use to a secondary sleeping area above a garage. Those temporary guest quarters are also required per our ordinances, as hopefully as well as all of your town ordinances, requires a UDC inspection. Even though it may just be a garage, if they're designating that has temporary guest quarters, your UDC inspector should be doing check-in parameter on that, specifically as to the firewall protection of the 3/4 inch sheetrock from the downstairs to the upstairs, as well as carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, and ingress and egress from that upstairs area. The aspect that Ben Kurzweil had brought up before is that what do we do with those scenarios where those people have illegally created that area without getting the temporary guest quarters? And then specifically referencing the state statute where if you basically get away with an illegal structure for 10 years, zoning has no enforcement to then say you can't do that. And that's where the difference comes up is whether or not the structure is illegal or while the use is illegal. I would, and at least our legal counsel as of right now, yet we have a potential court date challenge for like June or July on this scenario, where someone did build a garage, on their garage permit said not to be used for habitable space, created habitable space, and this was like 15 years ago. He's renting out his main house and he's living full-time above his garage. And we sent him an order for correction letter, said, you can't do this. You'll need to cease and desist the habitable use above a garage. He's turning back around and using that 10-year clause. Well, that structure's been there for 10 years and I'm going to be able to live in that garage. So that'll probably end up coming up with some case law about that. But my position is that we're not going to make you remove the garage as a structure that is permitted. And even if it was illegally placed, it's been there for 10 years. Your use is still illegal. Your use of habitable space was never a permitted use for that. So that was Ben's, and that was one of the reasons why that agenda item's on here. I guess to piggyback off that, when we talk about resort use, do we want to set a date on when we would establish something was a pre-existing dwelling? You know, that was something I had in that initial batch that went out to the towns. Some of our permit history, you know, predating the 80s is rough, to say the least. And it's hard to sometimes decipher, was that dwelling lawfully placed when constructed somewhere back in the 60s pre-zoning? Or did this thing sneak in somewhere in the 80s and 90s and we just don't have a lot of permit history? And now they say, oh yeah, we've always had these 2 cabins on our lot. And hey, look, we're actually zoned RR2. We want to now apply for resort use on that property. So those are, again, some of those other interesting things. But that was my 2 cents on the agenda item, and I'll defer to the ad hoc to see if they want to do anything with it.
I don't think you should be able to lie and do something illegal for 10 years and say, you didn't catch me. I mean, that's kind of snaky. Go ahead,
That's
Buzz.
very,
I actually have a question for Jay. Jay, what if, just a scenario, somebody builds a house and their garage is below their house?
like a
And
tuck under?
so, yeah, well, no, they've got one part of their dwelling here, their garage is here, and they have a second story above that. Now, is that not part of this because it's attached?
It would depend if it's a 1 or 2 family use. If it's a 2 family use, it'd be considered 2 dwelling units in 1 dwelling. Majority of the ones I see, those specifically on lakeshore development, are multi-million-dollar property owners, and it's really just for their 1 family, and that's an extension of their 1 dwelling unit.
Mhm. Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah, so if it is connected, you could have an extension of your house go above the garage as additional bedrooms, as long as they're
So majority of these, we're talking about detached.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, my thing is, you know, great to bring more people here. You know, we keep on hearing about more jobs, more people. You know, we don't have the infrastructure to take too much more between hospitals and schools and roads. Well, schools, we got a little room, but, you know, if you're going to come and enjoy what we have, you should pay your fair share. And because, you know, I go out to one of my favorite bluegill spots where I used to catch my 10 bluegills in 10 minutes and be on my way, and there's somebody sitting on there and they're not adding anything into the community, you're taking away from my resource that I pay taxes for. Just like, if the sheriff's department is over by the Chippewa flowage and I need them, or emergency services, and it's for somebody who's, again, not paying their fair share, I don't know, that doesn't sit very well with me. But do you want to even take a kick at this with basically it's, I lied, got away with it. Do we have to acquiesce and make it acceptable? And
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I definitely see your point on that. I think Jay's approach to the existing ones, when the case that's coming up for BOA or,
That was probably not important to you,
okay, good. Thank you. That is the structure versus the use. And they were never permitted for that use. They got permitted for the structure, but never for that use. That is an invalid argument, 100%. I also agree with Dale. I don't think enabling something that was never meant to be in the first place. I remember years ago when all of this was being discussed, and that's probably what Jay was referring to when we did the sleeping quarters or whatever, the fire departments were weighing in. They want to know what is habitable and who is sleeping where in the case of a fire. Is there somebody sleeping up on top of that garage? Is that a permitted use for that garage? I mean, those are other things to take into consideration.
Very true.
Yeah, and hopefully you've seen around your town some of those yellow signs that are underneath the fire number. There's a yellow bar that goes under the red fire number. They're starting to pop up more and more now. Just when you're out driving around next time, be looking at fire numbers. Do you see that yellow bracket underneath it? That means there is a temporary guest quarter permitted on that property.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh, that was talked about with the fire chiefs when we first enacted that ordinance.
Well, it's a
back in
good idea
2022.
for sure.
So the other aspect of what Laura and you guys are all saying, proper permitted above the garage has to have 2 escape routes, like any apartment kind of a deal. So I'm assuming majority of these people doing yourself aren't following permit processes, aren't building to that point where there's an escape route for them, or even putting an escape ladder in if there is a fire. And now, without being a permitted application, how does the fire department find any information about that facility without proper inspections or proper inspections from the short-term rental people? You got a big problem. I think that, again, it comes back to permitting when it's being built and what is it being built for, and documented what they're going to do with it.
Good points by everybody. Did that, if we take no action on it, then they would stay illegal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, the big thing with Ben's issue, which I definitely concur with, it's whether or not it's, legal's analysis of this is that 10-year aspect. If someone built one of those illegally permitted areas above a garage, secondary habitable living area above a garage, Ben's concern was now that could be viewed as a second dwelling unit after 10 years because of that state statute. And now that person could potentially rent that as a resort use if they're within the correct zone district and get a conditional use permit. I would hope that if that is the scenario, and when it comes in the time for a conditional use permit, we would just say, oh, we got you. And no, we're not going to permit the conditional use permit because that garage was illegally built anyways. So I don't know if that is a big issue. Your concerns with the fire thing is definitely valid. But at the same point, it was never permitted to be built as that's on the owner at that point. Then there's no fault to anyone else. I mean, that's their own liability that they're taking. I think this was one of Dale's analogies that he always uses. I mean, a lock keeps an honest man honest, where, if someone's going to be, doing illegal stuff above their garage, how do you control that? How do you enforce that? So.
You come back to the point of how many places have inspections by their insurance company anymore? There's where a lot of your problems are.
I don't think action is.
I had an inspection on one of my flip houses last year and my dog bit the guy. Sarge. He's only that big, so it wasn't a hard bite. And he's 16, 17. All right, does anybody want to take action on it? Otherwise, we're going to let it slide. Slide. Moving on. Density within the C1 district, tabled from last meeting.
Yeah, so we did basically state that, yeah, we are going to, double the area for each dwelling unit. Again, hotels has its own set of square footage requirements per unit. And while I was sitting here, though, the one thing I guess I would want to potentially look at, should we allow multifamily dwelling in commercial zone district, with commercial zone district also being a double the dimensional requirement per each dwelling? Because wouldn't you want to potentially allow apartment buildings in a commercial zone district? Wouldn't you want to allow townhouses in a commercial zone district? Isn't that almost the best zone district for some of those to go into? But it's currently not in there, so.
Well, we don't have to worry about skyscrapers because we're
Right.
limited to 35 feet, so. Mr. Kinsley.
I think you have to increase the density because they're gonna need parking and they're gonna probably blacktop it. And then you're gonna have your water runoff, which we're not controlling. So to answer that question, to me, is easy. It's gotta be doubled or whatever.
Right, so I think, yeah, if we could get a motion to double the area for each dwelling unit in commercial, that would be one motion I potentially think we should act on. The other is whether or not we should add multifamily dwelling into the commercial zone district as a use authorized by conditional use, because currently it is not in there. Again, our definition for multifamily dwelling is an apartment building, row house, townhouse, condominium, or modular home as defined as Wisconsin 101.71 that does not exceed 35 feet in height or 3 stories that consists of 3 or more attached dwellings.
Bond, go ahead.
Jay, I got a question for you. Do they have anything to do with impervious surface at this point?
Pervious surface only kicks in on shoreland property.
Okay.
Even more in particular, that impervious surface within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark. The only other time that any type of hard covered surface area and or earth disturbance kicks in is at 1 acre threshold, where additional stormwater management plans are required by the Department of Natural Resources.
So.
So if you had a 3/4 acre lot, you can completely pave the whole thing if it's not within the shoreline district.
I hear you. But that's why we wouldn't want to put them in R1, 2, or R. Correct? R1, R1 and R2?
Currently, yeah, RR1 and RR2 does allow for multifamily dwelling with a conditional use permit. Because we came up with a new definition of multifamily dwelling, we got rid of multi-dwelling development, but we don't have it in the commercial zone district.
I mean, what does commercial say to you? I guess to me, I'm thinking more business, industry, stuff like that. We do have an industrial zone district too, which there isn't very much of it out there, but I mean, I think a commercial is a business, not an apartment building. And they are allowed in R1 by CUP, RR1 and RR2.
Yes. I had to make sure we got it in R1. Yes, in R1, RR1, and RR2, it is in there. It's not in C1, and if we don't want it in C1, yeah, then it's a moot point. Then the only thing I'd be looking at is, again, the only other thing that would ever potentially relate to commercial one zone district for needing double the area requirement per a dwelling unit would be for rooming and boarding houses then. Which
Say
I don't
that
even know if
again.
so in the commercial one zone district, the only other time that you'd be able to have multiple dwelling units would be a hotel, which again has other sets of square footage requirements per unit, 5,000 square feet for each additional unit, or for rooming houses. A rooming house is a 1 or 2 family dwelling that offers overnight sleeping accommodations to individuals that are not a tourist or transient. A boarding house means a rooming house. And I don't even know, to be honest, I don't even know what that is, what a rooming house would end up being.
So you can put a motel there. Call it a motel.
Long-term rental motel.
Yeah. That's what the old Edelweiss south of town, the Edelweiss,
Mhm.
that was a motel. He couldn't sell it as a motel. Somebody bought it. They're all long-term tenants now and it's full. So I'm just read what it says for the commercial one district. This district is intended to provide for the orderly and attractive grouping at appropriate locations of retail stores, shops, offices, and similar commercial establishments. So that doesn't sound like an apartment building to me. And I think it does sound like a motel. So what was our question here? The density within the C1 district. So we did density for a motel, but we didn't for a multifamily dwelling. Do you want to for a multifamily dwelling? You can have a motel, but not an apartment building. Because otherwise the point is moot.
Well, again, it's still that rooming and boarding house scenario. If someone would want to really make a rooming and boarding house, they're still gonna need double the square footage of commercial. So I think that's the only motion I would potentially need is that, yes, and as Mr. Kinsley related to that, per each dwelling unit, you need double the area requirements in the commercial zone district.
I think that would be appropriate.
And that's somewhat already solidified in version 4, but I did it without your approval, so I'd really like to go back and get that.
I would make the motion that in the commercial one zone district, that we double the lot size requirement in that district for what? Tourist rooming houses?
No, I mean, it's just dwelling unit.
Dwelling units.
I would second.
In a second. Any more discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Nothing. Public comments. Anybody? Ms. Zimmer.
Linda Zilmer, while there's still a chance you might reconsider this last motion, so much discussion has been about dwelling units, which are either residential or lodging uses in the 3R zone, RR1, RR2 zone districts. But a commercial building is different. So let's take, for instance, something that happened in the town of Hayward where there are, I think it's 12 storage unit duplexes. And each of the duplexes have a finished room and a bathroom and a utility sink. If you have a commercial building like that, which under your code would also allow you as the owner to stay there, how much space do you need? What is your principal structure? Because you're not talking dwellings anymore. You're talking a principal structure like a store or like a storage unit. What then becomes your lot size requirement? So for each of those duplex commercial storage units with potentially habitable living space, how much do each of those require in terms of lot size? I think that's the thing where you just made a motion about dwellings, but you're not having dwellings in commercial. You're having a principal commercial structure. So if the committee would care to maybe reconsider what your motion is, because you're in commercial, you're not talking dwellings, you're talking commercial buildings.
It was 8 in that example, 8 dwelling units. Is that what you said for the town of Hayward?
And Jay can correct me, I think there were 12 duplexes. They are finished on the inside. They have a room, a finished room, or will have as they've been built across the state, and a bathroom and a utility sink. Our zoning ordinance does happen to allow that if you are the owner of a commercial business, you can live in your business. But just even, I mean, that's kind of, this is a complex thing that has not been addressed. But thinking of them as they're being told, they're in a commercial district. The buildings are only 10 feet apart. When you have 12 of these duplexes on one lot, what should that lot size be? Because you were just now addressing about what should the lot size be for a principal structure on a commercial lot. Dwellings are not on commercial lots. You've established that. You don't want dwellings on commercial lots. So you are establishing a lot area for a commercial principal structure as opposed to a dwelling. So I thought that was what the intent of this agenda item was. Or even if you say it's a Dollar General, should a Dollar General only fit on only on a 20,000 square foot lot?
Okay, so 12 units. And
12 duplexes.
So it's 24 storage units. They were not permitted as dwelling units. Now, whether or not they're not dwelling units.
oh,
And that's always been the big thing that people are, I guess, anticipating that they're going to be, hypothesizing that they're going to be. That's not how they were permitted. Because if they were going to be dwelling units, we would have recommended that they go to the PUD zone district.
so this is some kind of like artist encampment so they can stay there and have little art studios or something on that?
Yeah, how it was initially pitched to me is that they didn't want to define what each of the buildings could be used for, less not being dwellings. Because someone may want to rent one of these and store their boats and water toys in it. The next person may want to open up a storefront and sell knickknacks. The next person may want to just have it as storage units and maybe store their snowmobiles. We did not permit these as dwellings, though.
Okay, that's vastly different. If it's gonna be, I can't think of a better place to have it than commercial, but go ahead, Laura.
I'm just, that concept, if they're permitted to have bathroom facilities and a utility sink and a finished room, they can throw a bed in that finished room, correct? Sleep there and then get up in the morning and take the boat fishing.
It would be an illegal use at that point.
There's a little something else to enforce, knocking on the doors. Are you sleeping in there?
Yeah, definitely on the radar. I mean, we're gonna continue to monitor that one, but I've told the owner that several times. It's been issued as part of a commercial storage use only, not to contain habitable living area.
Yeah, and you'd, by what we've passed already, you'd be looking at having to have 5.5 acres. If it was,
And they got a decent chunk of land there too.
Still doesn't have the room. You gotta have the room to go around the building.
yeah. Well, and I just think I don't know why anybody would build that. But where else would you put it if you wanted to?
That's 13 acres, that chunk of land that they're putting those on.
Yeah.
Again, they were not permitted and issued as dwellings. It's to be as commercial storage units. The aspect of the condominium ownership came up, but that would have not required additional approvals because it is a permitted use in the commercial zone district.
So we're in the same meeting. We can still reconsider that if you wish. If I don't hear anybody who wishes, then we can let it ride. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm fine with that as long as there's an enforcement component that, every now and then you've got eyes and ears verifying that they're not being used for habitation.
Yeah, we're gonna have to on this one. And I caution, because I had heard in other parts of the state that other counties or other towns, did allow for living quarters in them. And I even told them, if you're wanting to go the living quarters route, is this kind of mixed commercial storage unit as well as, these apartment buildings or living quarters in these units, then we really gotta go to a different zone district. And the only one that would ever make any sense is PUD for that stuff, so.
All right,
Which probably could work because the only other PUD zone district you have is adjacent across the street. It's part of the Big Fish Villas or whatever it is over there.
go ahead.
Sorry, before, I know we're getting close to the agenda, can I just make one short statement? And that is, I've been very impressed with this group and the care and attention taken to density and density issues for habitation, especially along shorelines. But having watched the zoning committee review on Friday of camping cabins, that kind of turned the whole density conversation on its head. And I guess I'm going to put a plea out for the next round, looking at option F with camping cabins that are now effectively dwellings on a much tighter spacing. To me, that doesn't jive with what this group has just very carefully and painstakingly walked through. So I guess it's a request as we go forward on the camping cabin conversation to think about what that many new foundations and that sort of spacing for what are essentially tiny homes will do to the environment. So I've said my piece. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Other public comment?
Jean Acola from Stone Lake and Sand Lake Township. And I'm also the vice president and pretty soon the president of the Sawyer County Lakes Forum. And I'm sorry I was an hour late. I'm not sure if it had something to do with my, I was coming from Costa Rica last week, and when I put it on the calendar, I probably put it on for Costa Rican time. So, but the issue that you may have already addressed, and I just want to make sure you just touched on it, and that is the density on shorelines, especially with regard to campgrounds. And so I was trying to wrap my head around the math. But could someone essentially buy like a 400 or 500 foot shoreline and put mini campers along that shore, or tiny homes, or park model campers at this point?
Actually, they could.
Yeah, I think is that something we can address in this committee?
You would have to get a conditional use permit approval to operate a campground first and foremost. So even if you bought the 400 or 500 feet of frontage,
Yeah,
you still need to have a minimum of 10 acres, needs to be zoned residential recreational 2. You need prior approval of a conditional use permit.
okay,
Conditional use permit would then determine the amount of sites. And that is where you would really want to hype or, sharpen in on either the town and or the zoning committee to limit the number of sites based upon density on a lake shore. The aspects of camping cabins and park models, at least as of the last proposal and what was approved by zoning committee, was to send option F to the towns, those townsfolk that are here. Those options will not be coming to you until June meetings. So don't be waiting to see them in May. Zoning committee cannot even act on anything in May because our publications are due out earlier. So I'm not even going to send them to the towns until June anyways. But like I said, that request has a 30% max per the total permitted number of sites as the combined camping cabins and park models. So if you have this 400 feet of frontage and you said, I want to have 20 sites. No, I won't do that. I'll do easier math. I want to have 30 sites. You'd only be allowed, well, what's 30% of?
30, like 10?
Yeah, like 10.
Yeah.
That would be
And
9.
do they
9 of
currently?
them could be a combination of park models and camping cabins. They still need to meet same required setbacks of 75 feet.
Yeah.
Again, this is for new campgrounds. Existing ones are going to be a little bit different.
Okay. Okay, I just want to put a word in for protecting our lakes. And I don't know if this is the place to do it or if it's at the zoning level or the town level, but just, yeah. And you guys have spent a lot of time working on all this. I really appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
And we appreciate you for what you're doing. Keep in mind that, like anything in life, the two things, a campground and being a good steward of the water, they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you could have somebody who's got 20 campsites and is doing a bang-up job. Has a very small corridor for people to go down and enjoy the lake, leaves the rest natural. Now, does it happen? That's a different story. But, when we look at water quality in Sawyer County, which is still pretty fantastic, but fading rapidly, it's the death by 1,000 cuts because we've got so many people here loving it to death.
Yeah, yeah,
But thank you for what you're doing from the Lakes Forum.
you bet. Thank you.
So I
Okay.
have two parting comments before we kick it over to your final remarks, Dale, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
One is kind of going back on the density requirements in the lakeshore development. I myself was very distraught in the Act 67, the 2015 legislative changes that basically struck counties' ability to be more restrictive on certain bodies of water. That was a blindsided attack. Mr. Olson was zoning administrator at that time, and I think he would, air those same regards that it was a huge step back in time. What I've seen other counties where their saving grace is they have larger residential zone district requirements where they require 150 feet of width and 30,000 square feet, or 200 feet of width and 40,000 square feet. But they had that everywhere within the county. And when we have our RR1 and RR2 zone districts of having a minimum 100 feet of width, 200 feet of depth, we couldn't be more restrictive on just lakeshore development. So that did hurt the county as a whole. Our only saving grace is a lot of those environmentally sensitive lakes or wilderness lakes, a lot of those still have Forestry 1 zone district around them. They don't have the residential zone district. The Forestry Zone District does still require 300 feet of width as measured as frontage and 5 acres of minimum lot sizes. So that's at least our saving grace on some of those very environmentally sensitive lakes, but that's my 2 cents on that. Otherwise, it would require something of a separate zone district that we would have a different, size zone districts for someone to, apply for those. As far as my other comment before we go, what does the ad hoc want me to do from this point? I had a few little additions, which we talked about here now as part of the resort use that I'm going to add into the RR2 zone district, which is already part of version 4. I'm also going to kind of have it as that condo rental. So I'm going to add that. So there's going to be basically a version 4.1 or version 5, whatever we end up calling it. Does this ad hoc committee want to see those changes before I send it to legal? Or do you want me to make the changes, send it to legal, have it come back for your review prior to going to zoning committee? And with that, I will turn it over to the chair for answers to that question as well as parting remarks.
Okay, I have a question. Are we pretty much done with what we started with?
Yes.
Okay, are we ready to have a final document that we can look at and say this is what we talked about and approved?
Right, and it's whether you want to see that final document before legal, either says you did a bang up job and we're ready to go, or potentially chews it up and spits it out and says you can't do this, this, and this.
Well, whatever it has to do.
Right.
Right, but I mean, I think we're ready to look at the final of what we've done, because I want something that's going to be palatable to the towns,
Right.
and what we've accomplished in written form and, not with stuff crossed out and stuff like that. Just have what we have changed and even the stuff that we didn't change all in there.
I'd like to see before it goes to legal, and then I'd like to see it after it comes back from legal, if that is possible. That's just me.
I agree with you, Jim.
I agree the opposite way because that'll save us an extra meeting if we have to have and send it again and say no. If you want to email it to us to read it first, fine, but in my mind, it should go to legal first to make sure the clarifications we did has an approval rating, then take a look at it.
I agree with you, Jim. Why can't they just email it to us? We can take a look at it.
Well, thank you all for stealing my thunder.
What's that, Dale?
Thank you for stealing my thunder. I think we should have a final document. And I think it should get sent out to save us from having another meeting.
Right.
Jay can send that out to us. And if you've got semantic changes or something small, because if anybody right now says, nope, I hate the whole thing. Well, then what the hell were you doing sitting here? You know, and then you didn't say anything. And so, but yeah, we should see a final document before it goes to legal. But can we do that via email or getting in the mail? Does everybody email?
If you do that, which is absolutely fine, but when individuals email back, do not hit the word all, hit J only, because we don't want to have a walking quorum. Thank you.
He's got a point. So it'd be just replying to Jay. But I mean, there shouldn't be any major changes. If we've got wholesale changes, then we weren't doing our job. I wasn't doing my job sitting here because I didn't allow anybody to talk. So I think we'll get a final document. If you've got something, send it to Jay. Then he can, a week. By the time that comes out, put a drop dead date on there. You know, have comments back by this. He'll send it to legal. Then we'll get legals back.
Okay.
And then once we can look at that and, you know, if we've got major palpitations over it, we can get together again. Or if it goes to the zoning committee and the zoning committee chairman stands up and tears it up into pieces in front of the committee, it can happen. You know, then obviously we would, number one, probably like another kick at the cat. And number two, but all we're probably going to do is reiterate what we've already done. You know, I think everybody acted in really good faith. This was one of my favorite committees I've ever been on, just because there was, I mean, you saw me change my mind. You know, yes, I believe this. Somebody else speaks and it's like, oh, never thought of that. Never thought of that. I've flipped over. I also think, I said it at the Towns Association meeting on Monday, that if things go too far awry with legal's interpretation or zoning committee changes, who only one has sat here for every single meeting, if that happens, the town clerks will be getting a letter from me personally saying, you know, maybe we don't need to approve this, even though we sat for 6 meetings, 5, 6, even though we did that, they took our thoughts and process and didn't use it, so don't approve it. You know, we do have that ability to talk to the other towns, so. But otherwise, I thought it was great. I think we should see a final, and hopefully it goes through with very, very few changes. So,
Well, that's what I was asking for.
yep, and you're gonna get it. You're gonna get your chance to do
Yeah,
that.
so I will come up with version 5. I'll just let you know, the only change that version 5 will be different from version 4 is part of 17.3, which is the RR2 zone district, under conditional uses, under resorts. I'm gonna add in that language as part of condo rentals. It's not just gonna say condo rentals. I'm gonna have to do something that solidifies that, hey, if you're renting multiple units, even as part of a condominium, we're viewing you as a resort and you need to apply for conditional use permit. So that's gonna be the only added language. So if you still want to start perusing version 4 and have comments or suggestions with version 4, do so now. Because when version 5 hopefully comes within the next week to all of you, that'll be the only other addition into that ordinance, into that version.
Thank you. Yep, so what you've got in your hands with that one exception of what we did today. And so our potential future agenda items and meeting date, the date is to be determined. And the agenda items are hopefully to have an approval party. Mr. Bassett?
Jay, let us say that predominantly, most of everything this committee's done becomes effective. How, are we still looking at a lot of controversy between contradictions in our ordinance? Or are this done a major to clean that up?
Other portions that aren't even related to multi-dwelling development? Yeah, this zoning ordinance is a Frankenstein. I mean, it's been added and cobbled on to multiple times over the last several decades where, and I even proposed this to the zoning committee chair, as well as it'll be part of a condition, or as part of a capital improvement project. If county board approves it, I'd be looking at a full ordinance rewrite for 2026. With keeping in mind the language that we've done here today to be solidified as part of that new ordinance. But we'd be looking at hiring a private consulting firm to establish a new zoning ordinance for Sawyer County. Because there are several other inconsistencies that are in there and things that may or may not comply with other state statutes. And it's time that the county undergoes a full rewrite where there would still be a seat at the table for town board members, for general public, for the zoning committee themselves, for the zoning administrator themselves. But I think it is time that Sawyer County does take that process on. It's going to be a long, gruesome process, probably over the next couple of years. And it comes at a good time with that other statute that allows potentially towns to remove themselves from county zoning, where this would be an avenue that in lieu of just saying, well, we don't like current Sawyer County zoning ordinance, we want out. Well, wait maybe until this rewrite potentially comes around, because if you still don't like the rewrite, you can get out free of charge because of it's a zoning ordinance amendment. It's a zoning ordinance change at that point, a full rewrite, a comprehensive rewrite. That's what it's called.
Laura?
Just one more. I did not mean to indicate that I thought it was necessary to have another meeting, Mr. Strandlin. I just wanted to see the final draft version before it goes to legal. And I also am very interested in seeing what legal has to say. Jay, do you have any idea how long it will take Rebecca to peruse it? And I have to just indicate that after listening to the last zoning committee meeting, I found it a little distressing about her continuing to say how the towns really don't have to be consulted. And I don't think that is to address this in an edict way is a good way to approach it. And I think that the fact that this committee has indicated that they really want to see the towns continue to be consulted on this type of thing. We are a unit. We are not two different entities. The towns are part of the county. So, and I guess what would be the process then after it's legal takes a look at it and gives us their opinion? What if it's so far off the track? What do we do? Is that what you were addressing, Dale? That, all
So
right,
the to be determined potential date, because if legal
Okay.
says, yeah, everything's good to go, I don't think we need to reconvene at all.
correct.
If legal does this and changes, and I send that out and you guys don't like it, we'll reconvene, we'll have another meeting and fix it or change it.
And in my expert opinion as a carpenter, this is bulletproof.
I think so too.
Mr. Chair, I would like to address to Laura, being also the zoning committee chair, and I'm also chairman of the town of Meadowbrook. I let Jay know, and also Rebecca,
You did.
that I
heard
want
you.
the input of the towns. I want the town's input as always.
I heard you say it.
Okay, I just want everybody to be
No,
aware.
I heard you, Ron. I definitely did.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we are adjourned and thank you all so very, very much.